Hello, everyone. Welcome to Latter-day Struggles. This is your host, Valerie, and this is your other host, Nathan. Hi, Nathan.
Hello. Good to be back.
Yes, we are here today to begin actually a 6-part series. We have not done a 6-part series for a little while, but this one is a really important one, in my opinion. Not that others of them are not important, but this is a big topic right now. And, well, it's a big topic for me, and I think I'm a rather average person. So if it matters to me, I'm wondering if it matters to you. I was inspired to start talking about this or start studying about this in preparation for this series in the last few months, when I have noticed that amidst a lot of the stress that many people are experiencing here in the United States of America, that some of the churches are taking a stand and expressing how they stand and how they feel as moral authorities in our culture and society. And I have noticed, with some at first confusion and then frustration and then curiosity, about the silence of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the face of a lot of issues that are going on that a lot of churches feel compelled to speak into. And I made a post or two on my social media platform. I don't know, maybe it's been 2 months ago. And lots of comments and lots of responses, because I was saying that we as churches ought to be moral authority or moral authorities, or act as moral authorities in times of social unrest. And if churches are choosing out of that responsibility, then they start to feel very irrelevant in the lives of people who are trying to find spiritual guidance and connection and community. And some are trying to do so in the context of their churches. And so if their churches are not participating in what's going on the ground, people really start wondering what is actually the point. And so to that end, I started thinking about the need to better understand this myself. Why is it that some churches choose to voice up and be moral authorities in certain topics? And why is it that some churches choose not to speak into these topics? And that is what this 6-part series is going to be about, which I am calling Religion is Political. And so I contend here that you really can't separate religion with politics, that politics speak into humanity and spirituality speaks into our politics. And if that resonates or doesn't, just hang in there, because I think I did a decent job in trying to really explore this with you, but it does take 6 episodes to get there. So as I jump into kind of giving an overview of the arc of this conversation, Nathan, do you have anything that you would like to share or add into what I just opened us up with?
No, I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you.
All right. So me too. So let me just give you a forecast of things to come, because you're probably wondering, 6 parts, what's she going to talk about? Okay. So today's topic is Mormonism and their formal stance of political neutrality. In episode 2, we're going to jump into the LDS Church and their strategic political engagement. Episode number 3 is why some churches go silent and some churches voice up in times of social unrest. Episode number 4 is how politics and spirituality are co-constructed. Episode number 5 is going to be about what churches are silently communicating, or I would say the silence is deafening. What are they loudly communicating in their silence in times of social unrest? And then the final episode, I'm going to title, at least today, I might change that, but today's title for the final episode is, Does Jesus of Nazareth stand with churches that defend dominator hierarchies, or does he stand with those who confront dominator hierarchies? Okay, so as I promised, we're opening this up today by talking about this stance, the church's stance of political neutrality. And what I decided I wanted to do to set the stage is I wanted to go ahead and read the official statement that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has published about their stance of political neutrality. But before we do that, I thought it would be fun because I always kind of like to look back and remember how I thought about some of these topics when I was a more traditionally believing member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because that wasn't that long ago. And I always want to be staying close to uh, a different perspective so I don't, become too black and white thinking. I don't want to be black and white thinking at all, but it's good for me to kind of remember um, what that stance was like when I felt more aligned with, or at least I didn't question or challenge things. So when I heard about the church's stance on political neutrality, which I think I've kind of been aware of that for as long as I can remember. I remember kind of thinking that was a good thing. Like, like there's politics on the one hand and there's religion on the other hand, and it's inappropriate for churches to weigh in on political things. And then of course I was a little bit confused because I was like, wait, but they kind of do weigh in on some political things. But then I thought, no, it's okay because, say, for example, back before I did a lot of growing up and I had a lot of fear around outgroups, just because that was what was taught to me. Say, for example, if I would have pondered the church's stance on any sort of LGBTQ thing, I would have thought, well, but that's spiritual and this has to do with their eternal salvation. So that's not even political. They're actually weighing in on a spiritual issue and it's politics that are infringing on things of a spiritual nature. And so that's kind of how I made that okay, or at least sort of justified, reconciled what I, on the one hand, was hearing was a stance of neutrality that really wasn't, right? And so that was kind of how I did my, I don't know, shall we say, the mental gymnastics of trying to understand how the church was both neutral, but then also not neutral on certain things.
Yeah. So, thinking back myself, the one that really comes to mind was Prop 8 in California. That was really the first time that I remember thinking to myself, our we don't take political stands, but like you said, this is not a political stand. This is a moral stand, and morality is more important, right? And because I was also in that mindset, I'm thinking to myself, this is how we are going to keep our country from being destroyed, by war or by God or whatever it is that, we have to have laws that protect the correct morality that God expects from us, or else we will be destroyed, as the Book of Mormon predicted. And so, yeah, there is this definite mindset of we're politically neutral unless it's a moral issue. And then I started thinking, okay, we can delve into moral issues, but then I think as we're going to talk about, you come to realize that there's a lot of hypocrisy in there, and you also come to realize that it goes much, much deeper than this kind of idea of separation of church and state. So, yeah, looking forward to it.
I'm intrigued with, well, first of all, I'm loving that you and I were so aligned for so long as very traditionally believing Latter-day Saints. I think that has such value as we talk about these things because we remember those stances and remembered feeling very strong and aligned with those stances. And I was just kind of chuckling to myself as I was listening to you, Nathan, that we sort of selectively were deciding what was a moral issue and selectively completely neglected all sorts of other things that are highly moral issues that the church, and by extension we, didn't think were that big of a deal at all. And as he said, we will go much more deeply into that in this series. So very, very interesting nuances here. Something else I wanted to share just about my former self is as I was sort of pondering this, another couple things came up for me. Number one, I do remember being mildly bothered, even as a really devout Latter-day Saint, that the church sort of had this isolationist perspective that I always was like, why are we not allowing more things to be going on in our church buildings? Like, why are the other churches around, especially because we've lived outside of Utah for several decades, like they run food pantries out of their churches. They offer voting. Like these churches collaborate in partnership with their communities.
Yeah.
And they're working with people on the margins like out loud in their churches, coming and going, and even the participation that comes from inviting due process of, like the vote. And I didn't think too deeply about it because I dare say I didn't think very deeply about a lot of things back then. But I was kind of like, this may have been like the very, very couple of baby steps into critical thinking and being kind of bothered by that, thinking that was off to me. And then I also wonder if maybe something else that I started just I was impressed that the church didn't tell us how to vote. And as I reflect back on that, I can't help but wonder if deep down inside the reason why that struck me was because maybe there was some part of my consciousness awakening to the fact that the church was telling me in no uncertain terms how to live so many other aspects of my life that was out of their lane, that I guess I was glad that they weren't also telling me how to vote. And what I mean by that, among other things, but what stands out for me the most is this is early adulthood when, as a very devout Latter-day Saint woman, I basically gave up my sense of self and my autonomy to do what the church told me. And so it may have been at that point in time that I was kind of like, oh, well, I guess I at least get to vote for whom I choose. Not conscious thoughts, but in my reflection, I was intrigued with how grateful I was for that.
Yeah, you make a really good point because the church has never shied away from trying to insert itself into almost every aspect of LDS life. From how big your family should be to where a woman should be during business hours on Monday through Friday, to who you can marry and who you can date and what kind of skin color people can date, and so yeah, they've they've had no issues in the past in dictating in great detail very critical aspects of our lives, and so I can understand why if they say, "Hey, we're not going to tell you how to vote," that probably almost seemed a little off.
I remembered being grateful for it, but it's also probably because I was, again, like I just give myself so much grace because I was such a good little soldier and was not didn't allow myself to push back and have questions about things that did not resonate with the depths of my being, especially in young adulthood and young motherhood. And so yeah, that did that felt different. That felt different to me.
Well, and it felt kind of strange almost, right? Because if we believe that we have revelation, why wouldn't the prophet run into the temple, ask God who the best candidate was, and get a revelation and come back and tell the church and say, hey, God favors this candidate. This is, yeah, there's something kind of weird there. And we'll go into it actually, because there are reasons why the church selectively gets involved in political issues.
Yeah, I agree. And to their credit, as much as I think religion and spirituality is political and otherwise, it is very much a marker of an authoritarian institution to tell one how to vote. Like, I don't believe that that is appropriate. And so good for them for formally saying that. Okay, so let's jump into the document itself. I am going to go ahead and read this entire document because it is sort of the backbone of of what the church formally states they believe in terms of this concept of political neutrality. So rather than speak around it and assume because I wouldn't assume that because I didn't know all the details of this until I actually dug into this document myself. So here we go. This page was updated actually pretty recently. It was updated on June 1st of 2023. This is the official statement of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on political neutrality and participation. Okay, so before I jump into the document, I'm going to just give you a little bit of a sense of what to expect. I'm going to read the whole thing, but Nathan is going to be thinking about and maybe even taking notes if he has, we have some plans of things we do want to talk about afterwards because as per usual, we were driving somewhere and I was reading him this document just a couple of days ago, and it just kind of went into some interesting, fascinating places that we were like, ooh, we need to talk about that with our audience. And so make no mistake, we shall do that. Okay, so here we go. Here's the document. The work of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints includes sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ, strengthening individuals and families, and caring for those in need. The church does not seek to elect government officials, support or oppose political parties, or generally take sides in global conflicts. The church is neutral in matters of politics within or between the world's many nations, lands, and peoples. However, as an institution, it reserves the right to address issues it believes has significant moral consequences or that directly affect the mission, teachings, or operations of the church. The church does not endorse, promote, or oppose political parties and their platforms or candidates for political office. The church does not allow its church buildings, membership lists, or other resources to be used for political purposes. The church does not advise its members on how to vote. The church does not direct government officials or party leaders in the duties of their office. The church does not typically issue statements regarding disputes in or between nations, lands, or peoples. Rather, it teaches the gospel of Jesus Christ with a knowledge that living these principles limits contention and hostilities. The church does believe and teach that members should be, quote, subject to kings, presidents, rulers, and magistrates in obeying, honoring, and sustaining the law. That's the Article of Faith number 12. The church does recognize a universal right to the free exercise of conscience and believes all individuals and institutions should be able to express publicly their views on issues facing society. That comes from the Doctrine and Covenants, section 134. The church does encourage its members to play a role as responsible citizens in their communities, including becoming informed about issues, voting in elections, participating in governance processes, and, as they desire, seeking for elected, appointed, or voluntary office. The church does encourage its members to engage in the political process in an informed and civil manner, respecting that fellow members of the church come from a variety of backgrounds and experiences and may have differences of opinion in partisan political matters. The church also encourages its members to keep all communications, including on social media, respectful and aligned with Christ-like behavior. The church does request that candidates for office not imply that their candidacies or platforms are endorsed by the church. And the church does provide humanitarian assistance around the world, including in areas of international conflict. While political strife may be a factor in causing the need for assistance, the church will generally not comment on the conflict itself. Rather, the church seeks to live the Savior's two great commandments, to love God and our neighbor, by alleviating suffering wherever it is found, regardless of the race, nationality, tribe, political persuasion, or religious affiliation of those involved. Here's a separate section called Relationships with Government. Government officials and political representatives who are Latter-day Saints make their own decisions. They are not expected or asked to agree with one another. I'm going to start that over. They are not expected or asked to agree with one another or even with a publicly stated church position. While the church may communicate its views to them as it may to any other officials or representatives, it recognizes that these individuals must make their own choices according to their best judgment and considering the constituencies they were elected to represent. The next section is titled Political Participation of Presiding Church Officers. In June 2011, the First Presidency of the Church issued a restatement and further clarification of the Church's position on political neutrality. The policy applies to all general authorities, general officers, mission presidents, and church and temple presidents, and limits their personal participation in all political party activities. The policy is not directed at church employees. The policy outlined in the letter is provided below. This is the policy. General authorities and general officers of the church and their spouses and other auxiliary ecclesiastical leaders serving full-time should not participate personally in political campaigns, including promoting candidates, fundraising, speaking in behalf of, or otherwise endorsing candidates, and making financial contributions. Since they are not full-time officers of the church, Area 70s, stake presidents, and bishops are free to contribute, serve, or campaign or be on campaign committees and otherwise support candidates of their choice with the understanding that they are acting solely as individual citizens in the democratic process and that they do not imply or allow others to infer that their actions or support are in any way representative of the church. They also understand that they will not use church stationery, church generated address lists or email systems, or church buildings for political or promotional purposes. They also understand that they will not engage in fundraising or any other types of campaigning focused on fellow church members under their ecclesiastical supervision. Conclusion. To navigate the application of these principles of political neutrality and participation in an ever-changing and complex world, the First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints will continue to seek prophetic wisdom and revelation on these matters. The end. Okay. Why don't you get us started so I can take a drink, Nathan? That was a lot to read.
That was a lot to read. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things that jumped up. And when we talked about this the other day, the first thing that came to my mind, because I had really not been aware of this official statement. So the first thing that came to my mind when you read this to me is that I generally agree with most of the things that are said in there. I think it's really important to keep a couple things in mind. One is that, and we're going to talk about this later. I know this is going to come up in another episode, but I want to touch on this now. Churches generally are supposed to be moral guides. Okay. Where it becomes tricky is in the application or the execution of the morality that we want to see implemented in our societies. That's where governments come in. And people can have not only different views of morality, but they can have different views of how the same moral codes might be applied in different ways. And so for the church to say, hey, we generally want to give guidance on what we see as morality, but we want to stay away from being very specific about which candidates are elected to implement these moral codes that we support or which particular laws are implemented, I think is wise. Now, it hasn't always played out that way, and we'll certainly talk about that because they have actually given very specific directions on some things on how to vote, which I think is a violation of this statement. But I do like that. Generally, they are trying to say, hey, we want to give moral guidance, but not specific execution guidance.
Yeah, that's very wise. And like you said a second ago, it's fascinating how so much of this language is actually right on point. The thing that's fascinating is that in much of what we read there, application wise, it's not actually going on that way on the ground, right? And let's just spend a couple of minutes talking about some specific places where we noticed that independent of the neutrality itself, there are some pieces that absolutely are not being applied on the ground between leadership and membership in terms of having the ability to move according to one's conscience.
Yeah. So you read this quote, and I'm just going to highlight it. It says that the church does recognize a universal right to the free exercise of conscience and believe all individuals and institutions should be able to express publicly their views on issues facing society. Okay. Now, when you read that to me the other day in the car, I laughed out loud because here's the problem. The statement is absolutely correct. And yet, this is exactly what happened to you and me. When we publicly expressed our free exercise of conscience, as they say, a universal right to the free exercise of conscience and believes all individuals, that would be us, and institutions should be able to express publicly their views. That is exactly what we got accused of, was publicly expressing views that went against the church. Now, going on down here to this second statement, I'm going to just read it because it goes along with it. It says government officials. Now, I'm going to throw in there and mental health workers And political representatives who are Latter day Saints make their own decisions. They are not expected or asked to agree with one another or even with a publicly stated church position. While the church may communicate its views to them, as it may to any other officials or representatives or mental health workers, we're just going to throw that in for good measure, it recognizes that these individuals must make their own choices according to their best judgment and considering the constituencies that they were elected or hired or chosen to represent.
Okay, so let's just I don't want to get too far off in the weeds. I know how protective of me you are. How this happened last year. But I think the point that I'm going to take from what you're saying, Nathan, is that in theory, what they're saying in this formal document around issues of politics and political belief is that human beings have or ought to have the ability of freedom of conscience to discern for themselves how and whom to vote for and how they believe the good, the true, and the beautiful ought to be executed in this world. And so, what we're looking at, even though Nathan was kind of veering over into mental health, it's really not that different because what we're trying to say here is that we're talking about issues of how humanity can best thrive. Spirituality and religious systems speak into that around sort of being like what I like to call like a moral guide or moral authority. Politics then takes the input of society and determines how to implement these things into law and policy. And the whole point of this document is, in theory, that you as divine children of God have the ability, and we respect your ability to discern according to your own inner divine compasses how to move forward according to your own conscience. Okay? That's really good. That's good stuff. The problem is that we don't always see that in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, I will say that there's a caveat here that isn't mentioned in this document. Well, it kind of is mentioned, actually. They're saying that if you are running for office, or maybe if you're stumping for somebody, campaigning, that they're claiming that they will allow you your public voice in opposition to the church.
Yeah. And I think a really good example of that is Mitt Romney, right? Mitt Romney ran for and was the governor of Massachusetts, and he ran on a pro choice platform. Okay. And then later, when he ran for president, he changed it. He changed to a pro life platform. But in some ways, it makes sense, right? Because politically speaking, he was a Republican running for governor of a very liberal state. And so it says in the document, and it says in this very document, that a elected representative has a responsibility to represent their constituency, even if there are parts of what they are trying to implement that may go against their personal belief system. And I know, Mitt Romney got crucified by the media for, changing his platform when he ran for president. But in some ways, you can kind of understand if you are called to represent a certain constituency, you do have to take their opinions into account. And the church never came after him for taking a pro choice stance when he was the governor of Massachusetts. So, I mean, there are examples of where the church got it right and let the guy just do his thing.
I find that fascinating, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it is fascinating that I was getting ready to say maybe this is one of those situations where you can vote however you want as long as you're in the privacy of your own little booth, right? But if you're a public figure, by golly, you need to follow the prophet. But it would appear that based on at least your example, there is some reason to believe that they were consistent
Yeah.
with themselves on that.
Yeah, and we don't need to maybe speculate on why they did that because they probably had some, vested interest in having a high-ranking political figure that maybe they just didn't want to go after. But the point is all of what you said. Okay, we have an article of faith that says we claim the privilege of worshiping Almighty God according to the dictates of our conscience. And I think our conscience is the key there, right? You mentioned this. Every human being is allowed to tap the God self within and to try to determine, according to our conscience, according to our inner divine, what political system or what political candidate is trying to best execute the morality that we feel brings about the true, the good, and the beautiful. So we claim the privilege of worshiping Almighty God according to the dictates of our conscience, and we allow all men the same privilege.
All people.
All people. I'm just quoting it. We allow all human beings, all people, the same privilege, and as long as we're following that, we're doing it right.
Yeah, lovely. Very well said. Let's spend just another couple seconds talking about a couple things that I picked up on that I think are going to kind of be important because we're going to go much more deeply into these moving forward. Now, the first one I want to spend a couple seconds talking about is the very last, the conclusion of this document says this: to navigate the application of these principles of political neutrality and participate in an ever-changing and complex world, the First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints will continue to seek prophetic wisdom and revelation on these matters. Close quote. Okay, now put a pin in that because I'm going to read another piece of this very same document, and we're going to talk about how there is a bridge between the two of them. One of the things that they talk about when they say that we do believe, the church does believe and teach that members should be subject to kings, presidents, rulers, and magistrates in obeying, honoring, and sustaining the law. Close quote. Okay, there's a bridge here, and the bridge here that plays very heavily into a lot of what we're going to unpack here in the next several weeks together is there is an endorsement of and a reinforcement of institutional hierarchy and follow the leader. Right? Whether it be is it the 12th article of faith and the very end of this document, which is stay tuned. We, your leaders, are going to continue to be inspired as best as we can and pray on your behalf so that we can get back to you and tell you what we think you should do. Okay, are you picking up on the string here? Because they're also saying we believe that you should listen to and obey your rulers and magistrates. I want to read it again. Where did that thing go? We believe and teach that members should be subject, and that's a pretty strong word here, subject to kings, presidents, rulers, and magistrates in obeying, honoring, and sustaining the law, okay? So basically what they're saying is very much about the development of where the church is in its own psychological consciousness development. We are definitely in the era of hierarchy and authoritarianism. And this is absolutely very, very key and foundational to the church's silence right now. Okay, and we're gonna unpack that, I promise. But the whole point here is they're saying, follow us as passive recipients of our divine revelation and wisdom. Stay tuned. And they're also saying, not, we want you to awaken and become discerning adults of God so that you can dictate for yourselves who are the honorable and the integrity-based kings, rulers, magistrates, so on and so forth. They're telling you, per the Article of Faith, number 12, we follow them.
Right.
Period.
Yeah, and I think that it's good to point that out because there is not in that article of faith a caveat,
No.
like as long as they are following the commandments of God, right? So on the one hand, we say, hey, we want to, give general moral principles and stay away from electing candidates who don't follow these moral principles. But I guess once they're in, you subject yourselves to them, and that's the end of it. I guess I don't know. It's there really needs. There's, like you said, there's not a reconciliation between the two articles of faith, right? That we have the ability to use our own consciences to make choices based on our inner divine, and also this requirement that we subject ourselves to authority and laws, even if our inner divine considers them to be a violation of our own version of justice.
There appears to me to be an order of operations here. And the highest and most heavily emphasized order of operations in these statements, and as I see present in the 21st century LDS Church, is follow your authority, right? And it's less about follow your conscience and more about follow your authority. And that does come up. I'm going to, little spoiler, because we're going to go deeper into this in a couple of episodes, but I went back in and actually kind of studied what has the church said, the LDS Church said formally about anything that has happened regarding ICE and immigration violence. Follow your leaders, sustain your government. Okay, that's huge. That's huge. That the highest importance in a situation as fraught and distressing and traumatizing, especially as an immigrant church with people whom many of us know and love from all over the world because we've served missions, to choose as their highest value, follow the leadership of the United States government on this one. That's a big deal. We'll go deeper into that later. Anything you want to say, Hun, as we close today?
I just want to echo the same, what you're saying, that the church's statement on political neutrality leads with, we want to provide moral guidance, but not specific guidance. But it ends with follow the leaders and the laws, which is specific guidance and absolutely not moral at all. And so, like in the example that you just used, if I feel like there is, physical and sexual violence and inhumane treatment of immigrants in my country, and the pervading guidance is follow the government officials, then I have no problem with the American version of concentration camps, with separations of children from families, of sexual violence against women in these camps, of peaceful protesters being shot by ICE agents. Because I've been told on this one, don't use your moral guidance. We are subject to kings, magistrates, and obligated to follow the laws of the land. And so we have this conflict now.
Well, it almost sounds to me as if what is being communicated is that the highest morality is found in obedience to one's authoritarian leaders.
Right.
And I think there is, if not consciously, at least at a lower level of consciousness, some safety that an LDS institutional patriarchy is going to find in forwarding that as the highest value, because if constituents that are listening to them are compelled to follow their government leaders, they are probably the same people that will follow their church leaders in whatever they say they should do. In other words, if we have either withdrawn our moral authority from ourselves or never gained it in the first place ourselves, then we will, in fact, be governed in any and every circumstance by external authority figures. And for an institutional patriarchy, that leads us to safety and back to God ultimately. Of course, what we know is that leaves us in harm's way and profoundly spiritually, psychologically, and emotionally underdeveloped. But in sort of a fear-based system, obedience to authority is the ultimate safety. Even if, in the case of, say, ICE and what we are witnessing before our very eyes, something profoundly harmful is happening to our very own brothers and sisters.
Amen.
All right. Okay, we're just getting going, as we promised. More to come on this in our next episode. We are going to be jumping into why do some churches go silent and why do other churches voice up in times of social unrest. So we're going to just pick right up where we're leaving off right now, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Latter-day Struggles. If this podcast has supported your faith journey, we invite you to explore the many ways you can continue your healing and growth with us. On our website, you'll find support and processing groups, marriage and parenting courses, and free resources to support where you are in your faith journey. You can also join Valerie in the live fellowship gatherings throughout the year, where we connect, process the podcast, and build meaningful friendships with others on similar paths. If cost has ever been a barrier, we offer podcast scholarships funded by listener donations. To explore all of these offerings, visit the link in today's show notes or go to latterdaystruggles.com. And if this podcast has been meaningful to you, leaving a 5-star review is one of the most powerful ways to help others find this work. Latter-day Struggles is proud to be part of the Dialogue Podcast Network.
Dialogue Podcast Network.